can't see me, you Stevie. Wondering how I reach more evolutions than Evie and make it look easy.
What is up, Earth's mightiest subscribers? It's Blerd without fear. Welcome back to the channel. All right, today's video, we're going to be talking about X-Force number 37 by Benjamin Percy and Robert Gill. This issue, we finally got the answer to the question I think people have been asking since X-Force number 1. And I have heard some people complain that, oh, X-Force has too many lingering plot threads. It has too many unanswered questions. And it's one of those situations where I feel like people don't understand how long-term storytelling works. And that's kind of what this is here. The mystery of the man with the peacock tattoo, who I have often referred to as Mr. Peacock, finally has a name. We now know this character's true identity as it was advertised on the front cover of this comic, where I initially thought, oh, they're gonna give us some kind of a bait and switch. And while the answer to the question I feel isn't quite as satisfying as I would have hoped it would have been, the answer was such a deep cut, I had to go back and look at some things just to remember who the hell this guy was supposed to be. It is revealed to us in this comic that Mr. Peacock is none other than the clone of the original Dr. David Moreau, aka the Gingineer. Now, I'll forgive you if you don't remember who that character is. Honestly, this character has only really appeared in roughly 11 or 12 comics across their entire publication history, dating all the way back to their first appearance in Uncanny X-Men number 236 in 1988. The Gingineer, otherwise known as Dr. Moreau, is a character who is very obviously a reference to H.G. Wells's The Island of Dr. Moreau, especially considering that Moreau's entire gimmick was that he experimented on mutants and their genetics to try and come up with a way to create the perfect human being. That was his whole gimmick. He wanted to advance human evolution far beyond anything that mutants could ever possibly become. He believed that mutants' genetic evolution was just too chaotic and had no structure to it, and he wanted to create something that was better than that, something that was more focused, whereas mutants typically come in so many different varieties. And as the new Gingineer mentions in his notes, talking about how one can control minds or read minds, another can control the weather, another can turn his skin to metal, or another has a healing factor. None of it seems to follow any rhyme or reason. Why not create something that could do it all? And that's exactly what the old Gingineer's mission statement was, and what the new Gingineer's mission statement is today. Mr. Peacock, now known as the all-new Gingineer, is a clone of the original Dr. Moreau, but he was horrifically scarred in a lab accident with what was very possibly a prototype oxygen destroyer of some sort due to one of Moreau's actual flesh and blood sons' ineptitude. And while the new Gingineer has no love for his creator, he does mention that he regrets he never got to kill him, and the reason why he never got to kill him is because shortly after killing one of the original Gingineer's flesh and blood children, he never got the opportunity to come back and finish the job because Commander Cameron Hodge did it for him in Uncanny X-Men number 272 in 1991. This is what the new Gingineer is referring to when he says that he never got the opportunity to do it himself. Cameron Hodge beat him to it. Now, a couple of last notes about the Gingineer is that, for one, I wonder if there are more of him, because as we saw in this issue, Dr. Moreau didn't just have one clone of himself. He had what seems to be hundreds of them. And while the new Gingineer seems to be the one that got away, I do wonder if any of the other ones are still out there somewhere. Considering everything going on with Sabretooth and the Exiles as of late, and seeing Sabretooth clones popping up out of nowhere and how those tie back to past storylines, I have to wonder if some of the rest of the members of Xeno are just more Dr. Moreau clones. The other thing I want to bring up regarding the new Gingineer is that there are moments in this issue where it seems that he is not so much anti-mutant as he is anti-mutant supremacy, or what he perceives is mutant supremacy in the wake of the Krakoan era. And while his sentiment towards Max may very well be real, it almost kind of seems as though it is. There are moments where it seems like maybe Max is just a means to an end, and Max seems just as equally confused about what the Gingineer actually wants to do with him. It's brought up multiple times where Max questions whether or not his quotey fingers pawpaw actually loves him or if he's going to put him on the table and operate an experiment on him and cut him up no differently than he's done every other mutant that he's encountered. This is something I'm really curious about because we know that the Engineer has the capacity to lie. When he initially tries to tell Max about his origins, Max calls him out for lying about it, forcing the Engineer to reveal his actual true origin and then later his actual scarred face. The reason why I'm willing to believe that he isn't exactly anti-mutant and why I also believe that he does harbor some actual feelings for Max and sees him almost as kind of a son that he would never have had otherwise is largely because he also seems perfectly fine with helping Mikhail Rasputin rebuild Russia's population of mutants, which would essentially create a Russian Krakoan equivalent. Now, granted, one could also make the case that this is just likely him doing this as a means to an end, and that maybe he views Mikhail Rasputin as someone who would not create a mutant state that would wipe out humanity in the long run. That's a whole other story altogether, but we also know that the Engineer is almost kind of terrified of Mikhail Rasputin. He's had moments where he has interacted with Mikhail Rasputin where Mikhail Rasputin seems incredibly dangerous to his well-being. So I don't know, it's hard to say what's up with this guy. But in the end, there is technically some commentary here because once again, we have seen stuff like this in the past and it kind of plays on real life interactions between people who have a prejudice towards one group of people, yet can be so kind to certain people from that group if they suit their purposes. We see this all the time in the modern day, and it was actually quite prominent back during the times of slavery, where slave masters would have black slaves who they favored over others, especially if those slaves looked more like them, yet that didn't stop them from hating all others like them. So I think it's one of those situations where it's definitely a complicated relationship, and I do believe that while the Engineer does seem to imply that Max has a long future ahead of him, we don't really know what that future would entail or at what cost it would be, and I do think at some point Max would eventually live out his usefulness to the Engineer. Either way, at the end of the day, the Engineer seems more interested in creating the Omega Man, completing his creator's work as a last act of vengeance, and it seems he may have actually done it with the help of Beast. As we talked about in the previous issue, Beast had put a Krakoan egg out into the wild so that the auction house could get a hold of it, knowing that the Engineer would purchase it. And this egg was supposed to be inert. Xeno would have no way of cracking it open because they don't have access to a telepath, something that Beast and the rest of X-Force were not aware of because when Max was stolen away in X-Force number 26, no one actually knew who was the culprit behind it. And with the help of Max, he has unlocked that egg. And when Max realizes that his life may be in some form of danger, it's not necessarily depicted in any kind of an obvious way, but it seems like he activates that egg to create a distraction so that he can get away from his quotey fingers, Papa. Now, who exactly was in that egg? I initially posited that it was Kid Omega, that it was a clone body of Kid Omega that Beast had just given away. And this would technically make sense considering that it was in X-Force number 29 when Kid Omega took out Cerebrax. His body dissipated in the explosion and it unleashed some kind of a psychic EMP, something that wiped himself from the Krakoan databanks. So it would make sense that they would have a Krakoan egg of Kid Omega laying around that wasn't being used because they can't resurrect him currently. But that's not the case. The mutant that's inside this egg is some kind of a bastard chimera of some sorts. It's a mix of all the DNA of characters like Wolverine, Beast, Omega Red, Quill, Colossus, and possibly even Kid Omega or Jean Grey. Some of the connections are more obvious than others because we can very clearly see Beast and Wolverine's faces melded together with Beast's blue fur covering a portion of its body, but we do also see the pale white skin of Omega Red with the carbonadium tentacle coming out of it, as well as Colossus's steel flesh, and of course we see the quills you would associate with the character Quill, which is a weird throw out there. Now, there's also the possibility that this character also has the powers of Jean Grey or Kid Omega, as we see the pink glowing eyes denoting that he is possibly some kind of a telepath of some sort, and of course we also see Wolverine's claws, but it may even be possible that this character also has the powers of characters like Maggot and Storm, because most of the characters whose power sets we see evident here, their powers are specifically mentioned in the Engineer's notes, and two of the mutants that he notes that we don't see any evident powers of are maggots, slugs that crawl out of his intestines, and he also notes mutants who are capable of controlling the weather. Whatever this creature is, it is bad news for the Engineer, and it could even potentially be bad news for Max themselves. And if this creature could potentially be brought to heel by the Engineer, or anyone else for that matter, it would be bad news for Krakoa. This issue is really awesome and delves into a lot of things, and I love the fact that Benjamin Percy's been doing this long-term booking deal where he's just taking time to let stories breathe and not just rush to conclusions. And it's also one of those things too, we finally get the answer as to whether or not Domino is going to learn what Colossus did to her, thinking that she was the one who told Colossus to edit her memories so she doesn't remember her time being captured by Xeno, which was very likely something he did at the behest of Mikhail Rasputin and the Chronicler's manipulations, considering that Mikhail Rasputin would have a lot to gain from Domino not remembering that he was there, and now she does, and she also knows that Colossus lied to her about the whole thing. I don't know how that is going to play out, but we do know Colossus is going to be playing a little bit bigger of a role here very soon, and I can't wait to see how it all plays out. But anyways, that's everything I wanted to talk about with X-Force number 37. If you enjoyed this video, do the YouTube thing, make sure you Hulk smash that like button, hit the share button, and make sure you hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell so you don't miss out on any of the videos that I put out. My goal is to hit 100,000 subscribers here on YouTube in 2023, so I can't do that without the help of you, Earth's mightiest subscribers of the present, as well as you, Earth's mightiest subscribers of the future. In the meantime, let me know what you thought about X-Force number 37, as well as the reveal of the true identity of the man with the peacock tattoo. Keep it plus ultra, and sound off in the comments.